Hello to everybody and have a very nice green week. And welcome to GlobeEU panel discussion on broadcast live about how circular economy can create more jobs and growth. So there's a huge potential. But we wanted to touch the tricky and difficult point. We know that there are a lot of jobs in the green economy, in circular economy, in digitalized shared services. But then again, this drastic change of the paradigm is going to cause loss of working places in the old guard industry sites. And it's not always that easy to transform the mining work or other industrial work to be the new advisor for biodiversity services or shared economy digital platform employer. So let's discuss with our specialists how we can solve the problem, meeting the challenge of mismatched skill sets, and how we can facilitate real people in real problems and real companies to get the good educated workforce in one hand, and other hand, of course, people to get job and not to get sacked and unemployed because of the positive change of greening the economy. And our speakers are Luke Triangle, Secretary General, Industrial Law. Welcome, you are via a video link. Simon Wilson, Senior Brussels Representatives of Green Alliance. Mark Keys, Head of the Employment Analysis and Policy Division, Directorate for Employment, Labour and Social Affairs, OECD. And Lee van den, Policy Officer, Skills and Qualification Unit in DG Employ. And we'll go and head towards the problem itself and some suggestions for solutions. And Luke Triangle is very experienced Secretary General of Industrial Law European Trade Unions, which aims to protect and advance the rights of 7 million working men and women across supply chain in manufacturing, mining and energy sectors across Europe. So those sectors that probably are going to be the most hit and under pressure in this change. You have over 3 decades of trade union sectoral experience at regional, national and European level. So you certainly are in right place to tell us how big is the problem and what would your advice to be how to start solving it. So look, very happy to have you here. Now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I apologize that I can't be with you now in Brussels. I'm currently in Rome for the midterm conference of the European Trade Union Confederation. So that's the reason why I can't be with you in Brussels. But thank you for inviting me for this important panel debate. We believe that the transformation from the linear economy to a circular economy will indeed be one of the major industrial transformations of this century. We are always talking about digitalization, but one is linked to the other, as you also rightly pointed out in your introduction. When we talk about circular economy, we're also talking about digitalization, how we are connecting our products, how we are connecting our production processes to each other. So we believe that circular economy is certainly important for the future of the industry of Europe. Because we are dealing with limited resources in the European Union. We import raw materials, we don't have them here. So it is important that we give a longer lifetime to raw materials that we have in our products, and that we don't depend too much on import of new raw materials. So in that sense, it is certainly an important positive point that we go towards this circular economy. Secondly, also this morning where I am now, we had a long debate about the climate agenda, the climate change. Well, if we talk about the fight for climate change, against climate change, and going to climate-friendly policies, then circular economy will certainly play also there its important role. And yeah, we are talking here about the longer lifetime of raw materials, and nobody can be against that principle that we, when we dig up in mines products and minerals, that we try to use them as long as we can. So the impact for workers, there is certainly an impact, and I would like to say certainly a few words about that. First of all, where is circular economy today? We are doing already recycling of products. We are already sorting products. We are already recovering products and machines and whatever. We are trying to repair them. But this whole process of recycling is at the moment at the margin of our economy. It is in the low-skilled sector, underqualified workers, inefficient processes because there is no investment in these processes, and in general also bad working conditions. And what we cannot handle in Europe, we export to underdeveloped countries, and they are doing the dismantling of ships or whatever in very bad working conditions and unsafe conditions and yeah, unacceptable conditions. So there is already recovery, there is already sorting, there is already recycling, but it all is now in the margins of our economy. It's not in the heart of our economy. And what we say, and therefore the circular economy package of the European Union is important. It brings the whole process of recycling and recovery to the heart, to the center of our economy. So it will be a challenge in the future that we find solutions for the products we make and to give them a longer lifetime, and the materials which are inside these products that we can use them on a longer term in our economy. And that means that indeed jobs will change. We will need more qualified people. We will need more engineers. We will need more people that are involved in design of products, so that when we design products, that they are also made to be dismantled at a certain moment in time, and that we plan that we forecast that we know what we will do with that product once it is broken, and that we know how to dismantle it and how to reuse the whole materials which are inside that product. So indeed, there is a need for training, for retraining, for upskilling of workers. But if we know today that we are going to a circular economy, then the whole solution starts also today. We don't have to wait until companies which are today working in the margins of the economy have no future anymore, and then we are indeed there with a social problem. We have to anticipate on that, and indeed the skilling and upskilling of workers starts now with the workers which are today already in the sector. So in that sense, it's an anticipation question also, and not something for which we have to wait for the future. And so maybe to conclude, and I can come to some points later on. But for us, it is important that we discuss, when we discuss circular economy, that it's a fair transition, that it's a just transition. And that means just transition for us means that workers should not pay the bill of this process towards circular economy. And in that sense, if we put workers and the people which are currently involved in this whole discussion and in all the different sectors, if we put that at the center of the debate, then we start rightly, because then we know that we have to find solutions, and we have to do that on time and early enough in order to find social solutions for people that might lose a job in the process towards a circular economy. But as I said, and that's my concluding remark, circular economy will also create a lot of new jobs, because we will have to rethink the way how we produce products, the way how we make products, and how they may be dismantled. And that needs engineers, but that also needs manual workers that will do the work once the product is finished and we have to reuse the materials inside. So I think it's a huge challenge. It's an important challenge, but I think it's the right choice for the European economy and for the European industry to go to that concept and to support that concept, because it's, I think, in the benefit of our own industry if we go on this line further on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luc. And very important message about upskilling and starting it right away. Very quick question to you. Do you have any requests or suggestions for the Commission, EU or Member States? What would need it to be done concretely now to to help that process?
Well, we had already talks and debates also with Vice President of the Commission, Mr. Kaitanen, who launched the package in December 2015. We believe that an impact assessment is needed. What does circular economy mean? Because when you discuss circular economy, I don't think that many people can be against the idea because it's a good idea. It's good for the nature, it's good for the environment, it's good for supply chain because we will have more products, raw materials, we keep them in Europe. So I think there is a lot of benefit, but there are also indeed possible negative impacts and social impacts. And what we believe we should do is indeed make very concrete impact assessments, and we did already some work, what it means for the mining sector, what it means for the automotive sector, what it means for the household productions in Europe. So, but we believe that we have to make these kind of impact assessments in order to be better prepared to do the right anticipation that is needed in Europe.
Thank you, Luc, for your comments, and I'll ask you to join our discussion a bit later after the other interventions. But now I would like to turn to Simon Wilson, who is Senior Advisor for the Green Alliance, which is an environmental think tank, but for the substance even more. He's also the coordinator of the Alliance for Circular Economy Solutions, ACEs, that have been doing quite a lot of thinking in different fields of the circular economy. This ACES is a partnership of different kind of think tanks that are working on the field of circular economy. So what is your advice about the ambitious transition towards the circular economy and how to make the matching the skills in this forum?
Okay, thank you, Sirpa. Well, I'll base my comments on some research that we've done, which was around 4 European countries in particular, Germany, Poland, Italy, and the UK, where we looked at where circular economy jobs are likely to be created. But for this discussion, of course, what's important is what kind of skills are going to be required in those new jobs. And what I'm interested in is then how does that match up with the existing skills gaps, existing skill sets that we've got there. So first of all, we think there will be a lot of new jobs created on the mapping, which was quite closely associated with the Commission's current plans. We anticipated in those 4 countries over 1 million jobs to be created, new jobs to be created by 2030. So we're talking about a lot of new jobs. And the sectors that we were looking at in terms of what do we mean by a circular economy job, we looked at jobs in recycling, of course, repair and reuse, remanufacturing, what we've called servitization, this move from manufacturing to more offering services, and finally bioeconomy, quite a lot of jobs in bioeconomy as well. So what kind of skill sets do those jobs require? Well, I think the first thing to say, which is quite interesting, is that a lot of those jobs, the new jobs, are going to be set at the mid-level of skills, and that's precisely the area where anticipated figures from CITIFOP and other modelling of the evolution of the labour market of the next year shows there's going to be what's been known as a hollowing out of the labour market. So in other words, there will be increases in demand for the higher level skills, managerial professionals, maybe even for elementary occupations at the bottom, but we might anticipate there's going to be a reduction in jobs available at the mid-level. Interestingly though, for circular economy jobs, that can help a little bit to fill that gap, because a lot of those jobs I've just talked about, particularly in the case of remanufacturing, say higher level skills for recycling, particularly kind of closed loop recycling rather than downcycling. Those are the kind of jobs which will take place at the mid-level. So that's on a macro level quite good news, I suppose. But that doesn't mean to say we're going to get a just transition that Luc was talking about without across the whole of Europe, because geography is a factor as well, as is the question of where are the existing jobs. So beyond that, what kind of match is there in terms of geography and skill sets to the kind of new emerging jobs? Well, let me just pick a couple of those examples out. Let's start with remanufacturing, for example. The work that we did suggested that if you can increase remanufacturing levels by 20%, which was our anticipated level based around the Commission's figures of ambition for circular economy, then you will drive quite a major transition with a significant increase in jobs. The good news is that the sectors those remanufacturing jobs are likely to be in will be similar to manufacturing sectors and also the regions as well. There are good economic reasons for continuing to have the jobs in the manufacturing regions that are currently in place. The other good news is that remanufacturing tends to be more labor intensive. It's less resource intensive, but more labor intensive. At a simple level, you're taking something apart and putting it back together again, so that can increase the amount of labor that's required. So that's a positive story. So Poland, for example, is in a good place to benefit from those kind of transition towards more remanufacturing. They have a lot of their labor market suits a lot of people who are skilled or semi-skilled, and also it will increase jobs in the lower skilled market as well, where they do have a lot of unemployment in the elementary occupations as well for the moment. So that's good news. Similarly, some jobs are going to change. Recycling jobs traditionally have been quite low skilled, but higher tech recycling now means that some of those jobs themselves will need to transition. So it's not just a question of looking at people moving into the circular economy from traditional manufacturing or industry. It's also jobs which you might think of as being already green are going to change in the nature of their skills already. So we need to map and model those, as Luke says.
Zero waste treatment.
Yeah, exactly. That's going to change. But let me just close with a couple of challenges, a couple of more difficult areas, one of which Luke's already mentioned, and that's the move towards servitization. So you've got companies who are looking to make money less from manufacturing and more from providing services in future. Now, that is going to require servitization jobs we anticipate will be at a higher level of skills. They're more likely to produce professional jobs. And also, crucially, they're not likely to be in the same places specifically as manufacturing jobs at present. So let's take an example in Germany, BMW's iDrive scheme, where they're moving towards away from making cars and selling them to individual consumers, and more towards setting up sharing systems where everyone can rent and borrow these cars that are available. Now, that's a good idea from an environmental perspective. It will create jobs, but those jobs are likely to be at a higher level of mid to high level of skills, and also they're likely to be in cities, because those kind of car sharing schemes are going to operate in cities and they're going to be distributed around the country. So that could cause problems for more industrialized areas of Germany reliant upon manufacturing jobs in the automotive sector, like Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg. There's not going to be a direct transition there. We do need to anticipate that and think about that. Final challenge would be the bioeconomy. We looked at biorefining in particular. Now, Italy's got a great potential to benefit from biorefinery, mainly because of the raw materials they have, particularly in southern Italy. There are a lot of opportunity to build biorefinery plants to take advantage of their existing agriculture production and food production. And the jobs in biorefinery are likely to be at the mid to high level skills as well. They're quite technical jobs very often. So there's not necessarily going to be a direct transition there. Italy has a lot of unemployment, or quite high levels of unemployment, and a lot of that unemployment is amongst the elementary occupation levels, so unskilled levels. And so we can't just assume that, okay, because we're going to create jobs in the south of Italy, because that makes economic sense to put biorefineries there, we can't assume that means that we're going to just be able to tap that market of workers who are less skilled to move into those highly skilled occupations. So you need both of those things to be present, the geographic proximity and also the skills level to be roughly analogous. Now, we could overcome that, but it does require real effort towards reskills, towards training and upskilling. And it also requires, as Luke said, a kind of detailed modeling so we can really anticipate where these jobs are likely to emerge, what the upsides and the downsides are likely to be in terms of this transition, so we can ensure that we do have a kind of just transition which works for workers but also for the environment as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Simon. And one question to you also, and this is what is your expectations to member states and Commission? And Luke and you both mentioned about this detailed analysis and understanding. So would you put your efforts totally there, or would you anticipate some financial resources directed to this kind of upskilling, or having some joint effort between the educational institutions? Or
I think, well, in terms of driving the transition, The scenarios that we mapped did not depend upon financial investment. They depended upon the things like the Commission's waste targets being adopted. So we need to have the political signals in place to drive those job creation. That we think will create a market which will be freestanding. But of course, there's a role for public authorities to ensure that, particularly if they want to make sure the jobs are taken by the local unemployed population. That's really a key sector rather than by migrants. I mean, you can create the jobs by having political drivers like higher recycling rates, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get rid of your unemployment problem at the local level unless you invest in the local workers. So that's where you do need to step in. The market will not deliver a solution there. The market might deliver employment for workers coming from outside the region, but if you as a politician want to say, well, we've got a big problem, we've got high unemployment levels in our region, we want to address those, then you do need to step in with efforts, whether in terms of skilling or in terms of financial incentives to try and create employment for those particular workers. Otherwise, it just won't happen.
Okay, so you would at least prioritize in the council conclusion or something like that.
Definitely.
At the member states
level, but it's just going to be at regional level as well.
Would commit to do something.
Absolutely.
Positive actions like this. Okay, and now we are moving to OECD and what we know from that side. So welcome, Makis. You are heading the Skills and Employability Division in the Directorate for Employment, Labour and Social Affairs in OECD. And you are responsible for the organization's work for analyzing labour market issues and for developing employment and training policies that help member and non-member countries to promote better jobs. So I guess we are going to get the detailed analysis from you.
Absolutely, Sirpa, and it's great to be here. What I wanted to do was actually concentrate on adults with sort of poor or low skills, because I think that's the group that's going to have the greatest difficulty in making the transition from the sort of traditional industry and services into the circular economy. So what can we do about them? Well, first of all, we need to know how big is this group? I mean, is it a big group that we should be worrying about? Is it a smaller group and that with sufficient sort of training we can help them make that transition? Well, we have this OECD survey of adult skills, and we can actually look at the basic foundation skills of adults. And so we can actually measure quite well who are the groups that actually have these poor foundation skills in literacy or numeracy. You'll be pleased to know, Sirpa, that those adults that have poor literacy skills are only about 1 in 10 in Finland, but this rises to over 1 in 4 in Slovenia, Greece, Spain, and Italy. So there are a lot of country differences. So countries have a much bigger challenge in trying to integrate people with low skills into a changing sort of labour market than others. If we take Japan, for example, a key competitor with the EU, there are actually fewer than 1 in 20 adults that have these poor sort of literacy skills. Also, we've got to sort of realize that those people with these poor literacy skills are quite a diverse group, and so we have to target our policies accordingly. There's not going to be one-size-fits-all policy. It'll depend on their characteristics. For example, older people, migrants, and the less educated are more highly represented amongst this group. But nevertheless, we see that there's still very many low-skilled adults who are native-born, younger, and have actually completed an upper secondary education. Now, already they are struggling in the labour market. Not all low-skilled individuals, but a lot of them either have lower employment rates than people with high skills, or they have higher unemployment rates, and they get lower wages when they are in work. Now, the important thing is, with the changes in the labour market more generally, with the increase in the circular economy, we are seeing a lot of old jobs disappearing, new jobs being created. And that's also as a result of technological change more generally, the introduction of computers, robots, artificial intelligence. So what is the risk for these people of actually losing their job, and how many do we have to actually help perhaps move from their traditional jobs into the circular economy? Well, our estimates of the risk of automation are actually a lot lower than what some people have been saying. Some people have been predicting that 50% of all current jobs would be disappearing in the next 10 to 20 years. We think it's going to be a lot lower, like 8 to 9% on average across OECD countries. But when we look at the risk for low-skilled workers in particular, we see that it's much higher, that perhaps 26% of low-skilled workers may lose their jobs because of automation in the next 10 to 20 years. And in some countries like the Slovak Republic, this rises to over 47%. So that's a huge number of people that we have to actually shift from declining industries into these new sectors. So how do we actually sort of help them achieve that? Well, the problem is our training systems are just not functioning because, of course, to get jobs in these new sectors, they might not need to have entirely new skills, but they will have to upgrade their skills, do some reskilling. But the training system as a whole is stacked against low-skilled workers. When we look at the incidence of training, we see that high-skilled workers get 2.5 times more training than low-skilled workers get on average across the OECD. And in some countries like Italy, for example, that rises to 4 times more training. So we have to overcome that training gap and make training work in favor of low-skilled workers instead of against them. So we think that there needs to be a multi-pronged approach that has to be, of course, tailored to each country's circumstances. First of all, we have to take a preventative approach. So we can't let young people drop out of school early, and we have to improve the quality of the schooling that they get to actually reduce the numbers entering into the labour market with poor skills. Secondly, we have to give low-skilled people greater access to training. So for young adults, this means increasing second chance opportunities, because if they don't have those basic literacy and numeracy skills, even for those new jobs that are being created in the circular economy, they will be struggling to get those jobs. And then for adults, we have to just reduce that gap that we see between low and high skilled adults. The third area is we need sort of rapid intervention in the case of job loss. So we'll continue to see low skilled jobs being created, including in the circular economy, but we have to help workers that lose their jobs in the traditional economy make that transition. And possibly we need to give them extra help in particular, sort of when they're laid off from their jobs, but it has to be rapid intervention. And then the fourth area is, let's think about what firms themselves have to do, including in the circular economy. How can we get them to raise their demand for skills? Because ultimately, higher skills means more productivity and it means higher wages. Too many firms today still rely on low-skilled work, and I've got sort of low pay, low productivity approach to being competitive. We should not keep doing that. We should be going on the high road of higher productivity and higher pay in order to be competitive. And that means, again, trying to encourage firms to use what we call high performance work practices, which does require higher skills, and that will in turn give better performance to firms, but also encourage them to give more training to all workers. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting analysis and information, at least to me, about issues like that more educated workers get more training than the lower educated, even though in this change one would anticipate that the need would be totally vice versa. Quite rightly, you referred to the firms and their willingness to train their people more and go for higher skilled workers because the productivity is better. Have you had any guidelines or thinking personally or in the OECD how you could make that happen?
Yeah, there have been some interesting initiatives in a number of countries. I'm actually going to mention some non-European countries because I think we can also learn from what's going on outside of the European Union. The European Union has a lot of good answers, but not always all of the good answers, so I think there's still scope to learn from other countries. I think Singapore actually is very interesting. You have the Singapore Workforce Development Agency, and they manage what's called the Work Pro scheme, which actually aims to help employers adopt these sort of progressive, high-performance workplace management practices. And it actually gives help, guidance and advice in terms of facilitating job redesign and improving workplace practices. and actually encourages employers to recruit and retain, sort of local workers, but also mature workers, and give them the skills they need. So that's actually a very good partnership between the government and the employers. And Australia has something similar. I'm actually from Australia, so of course I would mention Australia as a good case to follow. But in one of the states, Victoria, again, they've set up a fund which is to give employers advice on how to adopt these innovative, high-performance work practices. And there has actually been some success. So firms actually have managed to improve their performance and therefore offer greater sort of training and higher wages. So there are some good examples of partnerships between government and employers that can help to establish better work practices, which actually helps workers themselves and gives them more training.
Thank you very much, Mark. And while we are turning to Liv van den Brande, I hope didn't mispronounce the name. I just would like to leave the other panelists with the early warning that now after this commentary you are invited to share your comments or questions very briefly to your colleagues about what you have just heard and learned, and after that we'll just turn back to the discussion, hopefully very lively one, and ask the participants from our live streaming to send their questions also. But now, Liv van den Brande, Principal Administrator at the European Commission, Directorate General Employment, Social Affairs, Skills and Inclusion. That tells everything, so you have a big cake to take care of. You are responsible for issues related to skills development, validation of non-formal and informal learning, and for instruments such as competency frameworks, assessment tools for transversal skills, for employability, digital competencies, languages and all that. That comes pretty close to this passport idea and lifelong learning. So why wouldn't you tell about it to us, please?
Yes, I would like to add indeed to the excellent analysis done by OECD and Mark, that the angle of education and training is very important to look into. And when he says that the training system is not functioning, I think that is a very good analysis, and that certain actions are being taken to see how to resolve, to answer to the problems and the challenges posed by the other speakers before. I think if we indeed look to the employers are requesting more and more different skills, not only higher skills, but different skills. And they are looking for what you could call the more transversal skills, that being digital competent, not ICT high skilled, but digital competent, having a bit of an entrepreneurial mindset, being a bit multilinguistic. But when you see and you try to analyze how they try to find those people with the right skills, it's not so easy to see, because they rely even more on the diplomas, on the CVs, which are very school-based, education-based. And what is known is that 80% of what adults know or skills acquired have been acquired in informal ways and in non-formal ways. A lot of adults, by their work experience, but also experience through voluntary work, or those skills and experiences acquired are very interesting to be measured and can help in the transformation for jobs. And so especially the skills that are requested, are demanded by employers, which is about digital competences, a bit of the mindset, being intercultural, are competences that people learn, not in school, but outside school. And we must try to catch that. And so it's important, I think, also in terms of social inclusion, of inclusion measures, that our lower skilled adults, and we have many, 65 million adults at the moment in the EU are lower skilled. That means they don't have an upper secondary education. That we not only look to the CV and the curricula, but take into account what is in your portfolio, in your rucksack of skills. What skills do you have? It means that you need to take a holistic look. You need to take also a very individual approach to the person, because it differs between each person. And you need to have a lifelong learning approach, because you have several in life cycles, different experiences. The European Commission is already working around it. When I say the European Union, it is a political message through the recommendation of 2016 on validating informal and non-formal learning, but the work is done by the member states. And in fact, by next year, we are expecting quite a few member states to be ready with their national arrangements to take account of those informal and non-formal learned skills, and to also for the low-skilled, the migrants, to benefit about that. So your passport, your portfolio, or what is at the moment very fashionable, your open passports, open badges where you can put all your experience, is very important. And in terms of the inclusive way, under the new skills agenda, we have had the upskilling pathway initiative that is building further on the 2016 recommendation on validation of informal and non-formal learning, looking into offers that looks first into skills assessment of lower skilled adults, finding out what they possess, the positive news, what do you have acquired as experience, which skills do you have. They have more skills than just school skills. They have a lot of life skills acquired. How can they then be trained or learned in flexible learning pathways, not only by second chance schools, because we have seen that it not always works, but in a very individual, flexible learning way. This upskilling pathway initiative will then try also to recognize what is being learned and to put it forward to your employers, because employers may ask for it, but how do they know somebody possesses it? Mm-hmm. And I will stop here, and in the discussion we can have further examples.
Thank you, Liev. Very interesting, and maybe this kind of a lifelong learning and upskilling pathways and this education passport that would be pan-European would be very good tools. I would like you to give a few words from this perspective, just quite directly to this kind of a circular economy, environmental jobs, to the topic what we just talked here about, from the old, let's say, mining, traditional industry side to this new, and I could say probably quite often more changing and varying job.
Yes, if we look, of course, to the transformation that is happening to those circular economy, but also more collaborative economy, you see that the skills that the people have and learn through the schools are not anymore fulfilling or close to what is expected. But those people do have acquired certain skills just when they were doing banking. They have acquired quite a lot of digital competences. Mm. These are citizens of today, and those citizens do have acquired quite some competences that they can offer into another kind of economy. So it's not that the upskilling or the reskilling is a total change. You have to see what they have already and how to build, but steps wise, in order to get, and that's important because you can do skills development, but at a certain moment you have to try to provide a qualification, because between skills development and having skills and having a qualification, so going back into the educational system, is still a difference. But is important when you want to have a job or when you are trying to find a job and employers are looking into that.
Thank you. So it's very much of helping people themselves, the employers and the whole society, to really acknowledge and learn what they already know and build on that and
Yes.
Acknowledge that.
Yes, of course, I didn't talk about what the education, the formal education system can do. A lot can happen over there in order to, of course, the youngsters that are coming should have a better orientation towards those skills. So I just talked now about the adults of today.
Exactly, good. And this is our topic today, the adults with skills and education and work experience, but it might have been on difficult area compared to the challenges of existing work. Now I would like to invite you to comment each other or pose questions, and look, could you please start? What thoughts did this discussion so far raise on your end?
Well, I think we have debated now in the last 30 minutes. We started with the issue of circular economy, but at the end we are now debating the need for adapted skills and an adapted workforce. But it's clear that it's not only linked to the issue of circular economy. So we are debating now what kind of skills policies do we need to have in Europe and at national level, at member state level, at regional level, in order to be able to deal with the upcoming challenges of our economy and the technological evolution. I think, first of all, it's really core business for the future of EU industry. That's the issue about the right people, the right skills. On one hand, we have 20 million unemployed people in Europe still today. And on the other hand, and I can tell you that in every sector where we meet employers associations, and as Industrial Europe, we are the social partner for all manufacturing sectors, all industrial sectors, for the employers and for the industrial associations, so from the chemical industries to the textile industries to the metal industries, automotive. Well, everywhere, in every sector, also in the textile industries, in the footwear industries, we hear the same point, and that is we lack workforce, we lack skilled workers. We don't find them, and we don't find them fast enough. So the future of a number of sectors in Europe depends very much, not for the whole, but very much on finding the people in Europe. If not, we will have to relocate. That's what we hear. So there is certainly a challenge here. And I think, and here I want to say something on one of the previous speakers. I think there is a joint responsibility here. It's not fair to say that it's up to the public authorities and to the governments to invest only and as only partner into the whole future needs that we have on skills and on qualifications and on curricula. There is certainly also responsibility for the industry. I mean, I think it's a joint responsibility where public authorities train people, deliver people to the labor market with a general knowledge, with a good background on all kinds of society, going from mathematics to languages to whatever, science. But there is certainly also a responsibility then for industry and for companies to add on that, and also to retrain people and to continuously invest in the workforce that they have today. So lifelong learning is not only a responsibility for public authorities, it's also a responsibility for companies. The employability of people It's a responsibility where also companies need to invest. And when I talk about employability, it's internal employability, being ready for a new job in the same company, but also external employability, which means if we don't have a job for you anymore, we deliver you to the labor market, ready for taking up another challenge in another sector maybe. So this is this transition where also companies play a role. So I think at European level and as European organization, we are dealing with that topic already a lot. Lieve referred already to initiatives that the European Commission takes and took with the new skills agenda of last year. One of these initiatives is the sector blueprints. Are the sector blueprints? Well, we are involved in several of them. And what we do in these sector blueprints in certain sectors is to identify the drivers that will change the sector and what does it mean for the skills we need in the future. And there, digitalization is a main driver. But I think what we now need to make sure, and here I make again the link to circular economies, to make circular economy also a success in Europe. Because as I said, also from an economic point of view, important for the future of EU industry. And there it's more than only having the right skilled people. Because if you want to make circular economy really true in Europe, if we want to make it happen in Europe, then the European Union will have to come up with also initiatives, legal initiatives on standards. What kind of standards do products need to have if you want to have one standard to dismantle products? They need to come up with regulation on that issue. They will have to maybe come up with financial and fiscal incentives to make circular economy happen. They will have to invest in innovation also to make circular economy happen. But all that is directly linked, as we already debated now, with the need for the right workforce. So I see there a very complex responsibility that we all have at member state level, at European level, public authorities, but also companies to make that happen. We have the best skilled workers, I think, in the world, if we want to. And now it's really time to have the programs ready and the initiatives ready to skill that workforce, and also the ones that do not have a job today, for the economy and the industry of the future, including also the circular economy. So I think it's a very important debate, but it goes beyond the issue of circular economy. And that's, I think, what I also heard in the interventions of the three previous speakers.
Thank you, Luc, for that. And Simon, what do you would like to?
I'm also struck, as Luc is, that what we're really talking about is not so much a single moment in time when we just reskill everyone to make this transition towards the circular economy. It's going to be an ongoing process, and we do need this approach towards skills rather than specific skills themselves. We need the lifelong learning approach. And I guess one example would be, which is happening right now in relation to circular economy, would be the move towards localized delivery and towards Uber, towards moving people in towards delivering services and people through vehicles. And the Commission is just trying to get to grips with what does this mean in terms of employment rights. So we're having increasing employment in companies like Uber and Deliveroo. But it's difficult to anticipate the future, but it's likely that in 10 years' time, autonomous vehicles are going to take over. So we're going to create these jobs, but then we're going to lose those jobs again. So there is a danger that we're going to ask employees to be reskilled and to adapt to this transition, and then they'll find, okay, but these jobs are not necessarily going to be the ones to be in the future. I mean, I remember I come from the northeast of England, and I remember when the mines closed down 30, 40 years ago, a lot of miners took their redundancy money and they retrained to become driving instructors. And we had huge numbers of driving instructors driving around teaching kids to drive in the area. Now, at the time that worked, but if you look at the figures now for the numbers of teenagers who want to learn to drive, it's dropping hugely. And one reason for that is because we're getting much more, the transition to the circular economy, low carbon economies means that we'll have more public transport, people are using shared vehicles. So those kind of jobs are not going to exist in future. So I don't think that as public institutions, we can anticipate where the circular economy is going to take us, but we do need to make sure people are equipped with the kind of adaptive skills, and we put in place the measures which are flexible enough to anticipate those, because we can't predict, we're terrible at predicting the future, but we must make sure we don't strand people by saying, well, okay, this is what you need to do to have a job for the future, and then they do that, but then find either they're in the wrong geographic area. I mean, Luke will remember when we talked about, transitioning from the low carbon transition, and somehow we imagined that Polish coal workers were going to work in the digital economy. Well, those jobs sprung up in the Netherlands rather than in Poland. That's not much help.
Yeah.
It's got to be in the right area for you, and you've got to have the right skills. So it's going to be an ongoing process, and we need to try and anticipate a change in mentality, not just the specific skills. And this is, I think, what Leva was saying, really, that mentality has to be lifelong in terms of reskilling.
I think you are very right. And Simon, I look to you, can't help commenting, because it's the changing nature of the work and the pace of change is going to just increase. We probably would need some other forms than what we are doing nowadays, and that comes to what you do with the single person enterprises. Well, how do you see and anticipate that kind of a work if you are maintenance entrepreneur for a company who is, instead of selling the lightning, leasing it, and you are sort of maintaining and doing that and acquiring your own clients and all that, and that's a huge possibility, and because of the flexibility, different kinds of maintenance and service work could be done. But then again, the social security, the rights of the worker and all that, that is a big issue. Mark, how would you like to continue this?
Well, perhaps I'd like to pick up on a couple of points that Luke made, and I think this whole idea that we need to sort of anticipate a better sort of changing skill needs. Now, I agree with Simon. We can't, we don't have a perfect crystal ball that can tell us exactly how skill needs are changing, but we can anticipate some sort of general changes in the directions that skill needs are going, and do a better job of adjusting our education and training systems to those changing skill needs. We did a big survey of what countries are actually doing, and interestingly enough, most countries have some sort of forecasting or foresight exercise in terms of trying to predict changing skill needs. But the biggest difficulty was actually then feeding that information back to the education and training systems, back to employers, back to trade unions. And that we saw often it was a very piecemeal approach. One government department would do this. Sometimes it was even the department that would look after migration, because they would use that information to decide, how many skilled migrants they needed in which areas. And that information wasn't fed to, say, the employment ministry or to the education ministry. So there was a big issue of coordination. So it's not just about better anticipating change in skill needs, but also about better responding to those changing skill needs. So that's an important point. The other thing was about, it's not just up to the government. It is a joint responsibility for governments, employers, as Luke rightly said, but also for trade unions. And we see already in a couple of countries, there's some good examples. In the UK, we have the Union Learning Fund, which receives some subsidies from the government, but actually is union-driven, where the union sort of decides on what are some of the training courses we need, and it actually encourages low-skilled workers to participate. So it works in favor of low-skilled workers. Belgium is also a good example. We see that the social partners, they set up a fund for training in the services sector. The services sector was growing, and so they set up this training fund in that sector. And they actually saw some quite impressive increase in training participation from about 14% in 2006 to 38% in 2011. In the circular economy, again, there needs to be the active involvement of the unions to sort of set up some sort of training funds, be involved in where training needs to be carried out, and that is a continuous process. As Simon said, things don't stand still, even in the circular economy. Skill needs will continue to changing. And then lastly, just to touch on lifelong learning. I think unfortunately, both at the OECD and the European Commission, we keep saying how lifelong learning is important, but it remains at that sort of level of rhetoric. In practice, we don't see much happening. We don't see this increase in lifelong learning over time. One interesting thing could be to revive this idea of individual learning accounts. And we see that Scotland and France both have interesting initiatives in terms of allowing individuals to take more responsibility themselves for their own learning. Of course, it has to be carefully designed, carefully regulated. Is there some sort of need for some sort of European-wide individual learning accounts? And I leave that for the Commission as my final remark.
May I come in, please?
Yes,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I'm very sorry, but I have another commitment at 2 p.m., so I would have liked to continue the debate, but I'm really taken by another commitment which starts now and where I have to vote. So I have to be there. So I'm happy to have been to participate at this meeting and at this panel discussion. And I just want to say that I do agree with the last with the last intervention, saying that the role also of trade unions. And I think in many member states in the European Union, I can say that trade unions are involved in the whole debate about new skills and also take their joint approach together with employers associations and with industrial associations on the best way to follow. I think one point we maybe also have to go to more flesh and on the bone when we talk about the right to training. What does the right to training really mean? I think there is a right for every employee, whatever level you have, to be trained because it's about your future. And it's also a benefit for our economy if you are good trained. So, but what does the right for training mean at the end of the day when you are a low-skilled blue-collar worker? Because in many companies there is a lot of training, but let's look to the facts, let's look to the figures. The reality is that most of this training goes to middle-level people or high-level people, and not to the low level. And I think there is still a mentality change that is needed to be done in our economy. And I don't blame employers, I don't blame industry. I just see to the facts and to the numbers. And it are indeed also these people that when there is transformation, the low skills are the first ones to pay the bill. And they're losing the job and there is no alternative for them. So I think the right for training, certainly for the level of blue-skilled workers, unskilled workers, there is still a lot of work to do. So I'm sorry that I have to leave now, and I thank you very much for inviting me for this panel discussion.
Thank you, Luke, for being with us, and good success for your work and other activities there in Rome. And the discussion is going to continue, and we are going to meet each other in different linkages concerning this topic. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. And now, Liv, maybe you would like to comment those ideas, and are there some thoughts that you would like to share with the rest of us at this point?
I will add to 2 points. I think the first is the importance that all the stakeholders are working together. Saying that is easy, but it's very difficult to bridge, for example, formal education, training systems, informal learning opportunities, together with social partners and the employers and the work site. Still, it is, I think, a must that this happens, and that the bridge between all those different worlds, and also worlds that are using different terms, different language, that it takes place. And I think that, for example, for the employers, asking for certain skills, 21st century skills, they see that is very necessary, but when it then starts to count and they are meeting job seekers, they just look to CVs and curricula, and they don't ask about experience. So we have had studies that shows that or they don't know how to do it or they don't do it. So it's very important that exchange and all those stakeholders work together towards something that is very concrete. And I think that is important, and still the challenge is how do we do that? The second comment I want to make is on a so-called dilemma between what is asked, that specialization, also for the economy, the collaborative economy, and in fact the openness and the knowledge we have that jobs will not stay, that people will have to change 4 or 5 times in their lives, that the jobs of tomorrow morning are not yet known how they look like, and so our university or higher education students at the moment are not maybe so well trained towards the jobs of tomorrow. So there must be flexibility, and the importance of having that entrepreneurial mindset, of having that eagerness to learn other types of skills which will be necessary. But there is a dilemma. You want education and training to specialize, but we do know also that those systems do need to give us citizens that are able to live in that world of tomorrow with quite holistic skills. And you see education really trying to fulfill that job. I think in the training systems and in the lifelong learning, there should be the same spirit. And again, I say it might be worthwhile to bring experience also on your passport and to show how important and what you have learned in doing so. If you have been in a youth organization, you learn quite a lot that can offer employers quite some assets, for example. So that are the two things, and the lifelong learning.
Question?
Yes, please.
I was going to say, I mean, one question that strikes me is, how do you anticipate, you talked about working with employers, but we don't know who the employers are going to be in the future, because a lot of these industries will have, the incumbents will be thrown out, or they will lose out. If we were looking, if we'd been having this discussion 20 years ago, we should have been talking to Google and Amazon, but we didn't know they existed at that point. So how can you put in place training programs which include employers when we really don't know what kind of companies will exist and what they will look like in future?
Very important, please.
Well, I think there's again, it's about sort of the roles and responsibilities in terms of training. So in terms of sort of the public sector, in terms of initial education, they can only go so far. So I think you're right. They have to get the balance right between sort of technical and more general transversal skills. They should be focusing on those general transversal skills. When it comes to the sort of the much more sort of technical skills and the ones that tend to change quite a lot, that is then up to the firms to provide the training necessary for that. But it also means that firms have to work more closely with education and training institutions and vice versa. So there has to be a much more sort of fuller and deeper sort of dialogue between the two in order to get that balance right between the sorts of training that you get in an education institute and how that links up with the world of work. We can do a lot better than what we've done in the past in sort of trying to deepen that dialogue. The employers may change that participate in that dialogue, but there needs to be that continuous dialogue going on. And again, coming back to the individual learning accounts, individuals, and partly responding to what Luke says, they need to have a right to training, and sort of the public authority can help provide sort of the subsidies to establish these individual learning accounts, but then individuals can take their own responsibilities for deciding, yes, I can see that I need to change a job, this other job would be more interesting, what training do I need? And then they can actually do the training that they think will work best for them. So we have to give individuals more rights and responsibilities for their own training.
May I give a pragmatic response? You are not asking employers to have a forecast for 40 or 50 years to come. I think already sitting down with the employers to know what they are expecting of job changes in the next 10 years would benefit a lot universities, higher education, vocational and education systems to try and in mutual dialogue and keeping the whole time in touch with each other helps to try to keep up with the changes that are happening. And then, of course, I do believe that impact assessment, forecast, research is important there, and that's why although also those stakeholders should stay close to the employers. But employers do know quite a lot that they don't share with the education and training systems or with social partners. So let's bridge them better.
Very important. I was trying to look for Roland if we have questions. No? Then thank you to our debaters. So actually we didn't debate that much, quite unanimity. our panelists for very inspiring and good discussion. I have to mention that sometimes I do hope that the EU would have more competencies in the field of education and learning, and that comes to the fact that while we are in very fast-paced, changing world, I think that people should be learned more and more, as mentioned here in the discussion, the ability to learn, ability to evaluate, to judge what they read, what they learn, the ability to understand different schools of thought, the ability to ethical knowledge, so coping with differences, ability to understand and identify the diversity and knowledges on themselves and other fields. And so if we don't have that block on place, it's the rest, the skills is very difficult to hang on there. And Mark, I really have to be very much on board with you and the rest that maybe this is the big change in our training and educational systems. The education is different and the skills is learned by doing, then by employers and companies, at least in great part. Well, we are going to continue this discussion. I'm pretty certain we are not going to make it ready today or after 10 years. But the circular economy is a good thing for the work, for economy and for environment and quality of life. So let's work for these end goals and have a very good and interesting, inspiring Green Week, and hope you find your jobs and your profits on circular economy as well.